Sahana bhavatu sahana bhunaktu saha viryam karavavahai tejasvina vaditamastu ma vidvishabhai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityormamritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Savitur Varmarupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Deepaye. Sri Aurobindo has a long association with Sri Krishna and with the Bhagavad Gita. But it is not the earliest entrant in the practice of yoga in his life. Remember, he was sent to England as a small boy at the age of 7, kept apart from his own native traditions, brought up to be a proper English gentleman. So it was only when he was in his late teens that he began to reach out and touch and then to possess India's great spiritual tradition. He read the Upanishads, translated by Max Mueller, an awful translator. But even through that opaque English, he found in himself the experience of the Atman at the level of the mind. This was simply a brilliant insight. This was not the practice of yoga, and he set it aside. When he came to India, he had an immediate experience of a vast peace descending upon him at the Apollo Bandar. As soon as he came back from the West to India, what had seemed like a darkness that had gathered over him when he was a small boy lifted. And anybody that's been to India can tell you what an extraordinary experience it is. You are as if wading into an ocean of light to stand on the soil there. So Sri Aurobindo had already these intimations of a greater consciousness, the experience of the Atman in the mind, the descent from above of a great peace into him just by dint of returning to India. But he was not drawn to religion, he was not drawn to yoga. But he heard along the way, as he began to involve himself in revolutionary politics and really to become one of the intellectual and spiritual leaders of that movement, to wrest freedom away from the English, from the British, he heard that through the practice of yoga one could get power. And he thought, if I can get power to liberate my country, it would be worth it. What he began to practice was pranayama. A great deal of pranayama, as many as 8 to 10 hours a day spent in pranayama. And it didn't give him much power to liberate India with, but it did bring him the capacity to write poetry fluently. Before he was always a fine poet, don't misunderstand me, but what used to take him hours to write a few lines, now he could write 100 lines in a sitting. All of it metrically sound, all of it beautiful to the ear. But in the practice of pranayama, he got caught up in his work and missed a few days and fell ill. This is the difficulty with pranayama. If you are not mindful of its rhythms, it rebounds upon you and claims back the life force that it had offered you. So he got terribly sick and eventually recovered. Didn't pick up pranayama again. But he was still interested in what he might be able to do for India through the practice of yoga. He met a man named Vishnu Bhaskar Lele, who was a powerful bhakta and tantric, who said that he would guide Sri Aurobindo if he could give him 3 days. He said, how can I get 3 days with this revolutionary activity I'm involved with? He said, if you can give me 3 days, then I will help you. He got them. In Baroda, went to the rooftop of a friend's house, sat down with Lele. Lele said, just watch. You'll see, coming in from outside, thoughts circling that try to enter into your mind space. When you see them coming, stop them. Sri Aurobindo closed his eyes and could see at once that's exactly what happens. That the thoughts aren't born in us, they come circling in from the universe. Because our antennae are up and we're used to attracting certain thoughts, those are the thoughts that come our way. So he saw them and he stopped them. He said, really, it was immediate. His mind fell into a blank. He was plunged into a great silence. The sense of self disappeared in that oceanic being. This is the nirvanic experience, the blowing out of the separative existence. So Sri Aurobindo was thrown into what is the end of a lengthy sadhana within moments of having begun it. He had a great realization, laya, the absorption into the silent Brahman. And revolutionary politics called him back. He was not sitting in a cave of tapasya, isolated from the world, a renunciant. He still was married. He still was leading the revolutionary movement, and they still wanted him to speak. So he went back, stood before thousands of people, without a thought in his head. And his temporary teacher, Lele, when asked, said, trust yourself and trust the guide within, and the words will come. Sri Aurobindo stood, and the words did begin to form in him, and just rolled out, and he gave one of the most moving and powerful speeches of his political life to that date. And then he continued and continued and continued to work, to pour out works without interference. There was no self, in a sense, no ego self to judge. Is this good? Is this bad? Do I want? Do I not want? And yet, though he was profoundly one with the divine, there came an intimation to him. quit this work. I have other things for you. He ignored it. He felt, how can this work go forward? You see, even when you get the central realization, something of the ahankara, of the I maker, of the ego continues. The realization of the self does not abolish completely the makings of the ego. So even in Sri Aurobindo, this seed was there. And he ignored that prompting from within. And then he was arrested on a charge of sedition and put in the Alipur jail, where you wouldn't put a dog, kept in solitary confinement. And he was under threat of execution should he be found guilty of the charges. He was innocent of the charges. And at first he was, as you might understand, energized to be so arraigned. And then heard this voice again, or a suggestion from within. Just wait. Be calm. And so he did calm himself. And then he spoke with the warders and said, can I have some reading material? May I have the Gita and the Upanishads? And they came to him, and he began reading the Gita again. He'd had some introduction to it. He had a respect for it. He loved the Upanishads always, but he had not studied deeply. But as he began to read, and as he began to watch, he could see that that vast impersonal consciousness which he possessed was being transformed. That instead of there being an impersonality, there was a great being. There was a person looking at him through everything. It was the same person. It was God. It was Vasudeva. It was Krishna. Whether he looked at the jailkeeper, or the tree, or the walls, or the ants biting him, always it was that same being looking at him. And then it said, you ignored me. You think you're important for the work of this nation. I have chosen others to liberate this country, those who could do a better job than you. For you, I have a different work. And now you have come into my chambers. This jailhouse will be your cave of tapasya, and I will instruct you myself in the ways of yoga. And Sri Aurobindo moved from that vast impersonality into a recognition of the omnipresent divine, that God who was everywhere and stationed in all beings. But this was not all that Krishna wanted to show him, but also how to marry the active and the passive states of Brahman, and then to lift it all into new regions of consciousness. Because all of this that we've spoken of is the traditional Vedanta. You can get spiritual realization from this, an absolute state of freedom inwardly, but you cannot change nature. So Krishna lifted him to a new level and showed him regions above the mind, the greater instrumentalities of the spiritual consciousness that he called supramental, and that ancient Upanishads call Vijnana. And he saw that if that consciousness was to manifest here, was in a sense a point of evolution that the human could climb to, from body and life and mind up to this greater consciousness, and we could import it here, then truly we could make life divine. So Krishna showed him this whole panorama of possible spiritual development and brought him back into the Gita, which then later, some years thence, Sri Aurobindo would write essays about, in which we now are beginning to study on Sunday nights, the essays on the Gita. His essays on the Gita show us how to live spiritually. If we don't achieve the aims of the Gita, then that greater panorama that Sri Aurobindo awoke to is inaccessible to us. So the first teaching of the Gita is continue to work. Continue to do what has been assigned to you, what has been selected by you as your soul's mission. Don't be deceived and don't be confused. It is what you do soulfully that matters the most. And in the doing of it, if you can forget the self, forget the idea that something will come back to me from this work, if you can simply do it as an offering, a gift, and let it go, do it as perfectly as you can, with all your concentration, as if everything depended upon it, and yet with the kind of freedom that says, I'm not in a hurry, I have all of eternity to accomplish it. If you can marry that, then more and more egoism will melt away from you, and what will be left standing is the soul awakening to itself, working through the given nature, living in communion, a growing communion with a higher consciousness, with this face of Krishna peeking through it, doing divine works in the world. The divine will begins to supplant the human will. One comes then to know more and more thoroughly what is going on around. You see all things as figurations of the divine. You feel the afflatus of inspiration coming from above, moving through you. You're aware of the principles of how the divine is acting. You become sensitive to the gusts of wind that blow you this way and that, knowing what is the secret intention behind. You begin to trust, to have great faith in what the divine is executing in the world beyond mental and human comprehension. This is so vast a universe, and yet this one being, through innumerable faces, is marching towards a conclusion, towards a climax and a denouement that only it understands. We cannot understand it from a human level, but if we enter into it by identifying our consciousness with that, by living in communion with that, then in a sense we share in that greater knowledge. And then a portion of us is lifted up into rapture. We are in Ananda. We are in true being, and we are aware of it. So the Gita takes us from works to knowledge, and then from knowledge to love. It saves love for the last. so that we don't settle for sentimentality, so that we don't settle for preferences. We have to have the impersonality of doing works without claim, the renunciation of the fruit. We have to have the vastness of vision to see the divine everywhere. And then we can love freely and without bounds, because there is only one thing to love, the divine everywhere. But special relationships exist. The relationship between Krishna and Arjuna is a special one. The relationship between Krishna and Radha is a special one. It does not erase individuality, but it gives it a grand backdrop so that everything is in its right place. But even so, the Gita, having installed us in the sphere of the perfection of works, lifts us out of bondage to normal nature and says, the perfect yoga brings you through the akshara and the kshara purusha, the unmoving and the moving person, up to my level, where you share in my nature, madbhavam, and here you live in my higher force of consciousness. Here is the supreme nature, para prakriti, above, beyond the gunas, beyond the qualities of nature, beyond sattva and rajas and tamas. Now you have come to the source of light, of calm, of power. And this, it is hinted, can be imported back to earth. So there is just that hint in the Gita that there is something beyond the Vedantic portals waiting our entry. This is where Sri Aurobindo's yoga would begin. His own personal sadhana continued after these great Vedantic realizations have all been synthesized and fused in him. Still, he continues to work on yoga, continues to grow infinitely in every direction, inwards, above, around, below. It is an ensphering knowledge and a fusion of dynamic love pouring itself out gnostically in terms of knowledge. Knowledge pouring itself out dynamically in terms of love. Love and knowledge pouring themselves out in terms of action. This is the mighty synthesis that the Gita offers. Sri Aurobindo began this great course with Krishna in a jail in Alipur, and then carried that work to Pondicherry, where he sat in a room. You would think that sitting in a room is not doing anything. Look at the mighty ashram that has flowered around him. Look at the 30 volumes of material that he wrote, an epic poem, 24,000 lines long, a philosophic work, The Life Divine, which may be the greatest intellectual achievement of the 20th century. But look at yourselves, all of you who have been attracted to this yoga, all of you who have felt something stir in you, this call to the future, this call out of the morass of ego and desire, and into joyful soul existence. The only thing we have to lose is our ignorance on this journey. We have to be willing to leave the prison. One of the closing verses in the Gita, not the ultimate one, but the 61st, describes how the Supreme sits in the heart of all creatures, turning them as if mounted upon a machine. That's where your soul is. So, at the very core of your soul is this drop of bliss, which is the Supreme Person's own presence in you, what the Gita calls the Purushottama. You are not other than that, and nothing is other than that. We are all in different stages of evolution, finding our way back to that conscious origin. You've already embarked. Continue the journey. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, if you have any answers, Das.
Did I hear the word inspiring?
Yeah.
Inspiring knowledge.
Huh.
Very nice.
Thank you. If you'll let me take a moment, I'll just say that all of these things connect to me beautifully at this moment. Tomorrow is the 15th of August. It's actually the 15th of August in India right now, and people are going through Sri Aurobindo's room as we speak, walking through, receiving a blessings packet and a darshan card. And tomorrow, those of you who come here will receive a blessings packet and a darshan card, and other things too that we'd like to commemorate the day with. But I want to tell you that through the hard work of, I can't call them my friends, they're much closer to me than that, Elaine Sargent and Jennifer Williams, that our website is launching tomorrow. We're calling it Peacock Pages, but you'll find it at IKSC.org, and you'll see some things that are unique, and you're welcome to read or listen or download at your leisure, at your pleasure. Thank you, Jennifer and Elaine. The newsletter will be available online at that website from now on. And tomorrow is also the birthday of free India, just as it is the birthday of Sri Aurobindo. What he worked for in his early life came to him as a gift in 1947 on his birthday. India was finally free. I don't know that it was quite the consummation that he wanted because it was a divided India into Pakistan and India, when India should be one. Culturally, it is still one. Pakistan and Bangladesh are not different from India. It should be one again. Perhaps it will be. Culturally, it is. Oneness is the soul of spirituality. We have a long way to go on this old earth, but that harmony awaits us and beckons to us. Let's go get it. And let's start now with the meditation. And I'll greet you when we come out. Much love to you all. Namaste.
Namaste.